Chapter 20. The First Discovery. Shellington was a nice chap, Inkling had come to realize over the last few weeks. Smart, enthusiastic, full of curiosity. The boy was a spitting image of Inkling when he was young. They would have conversations at length throughout the weeks that they've known each other, while the submarine was built, and the conversations haven't stopped once the Octopod launched. The Octonauts did not go on any missions yet. Inkling planned to have a few days out at sea first, have everyone get used to the new life and protocol before going on the first mission. So with no missions, there wasn't any data that Shellington could use for his lab. So he basically had all the time in the world. And, as Inkling came to find out, he used it to his advantage. "Good morning, Professor," Shellington greeted, sliding into the seat next to him. It was breakfast, and the whole crew was in the dining area, surrounding the large, rectangular table. "Good morning, Shellington," Inkling returned the expression. "Have a good first night?" "Yes," Shellington replied. He stretched a bit. "I'm surprised I slept so well. The Octopod's surprisingly quiet. I'd expect the engine to be roaring loudly." "You have Tweak to thank for that," Inkling said. The octopus glanced at the rabbit. She was talking to Captain Barnacles across the table, a little ways away. She seemed a lot more rejuvenated now than when she was building the submarine. Inkling was glad at that. "Tweak had designed special generators and engines for the Octopod and Gups," Inkling explained, looking at the sea otter again. "All eco-friendly, and naturally quieter than engines that run on gasoline. And the design of the walls also diminishes the sounds as well." "Fascinating," Shellington said. He glanced at Tweak as well. "I should ask her about the details of the design sometime." "Good idea," Inkling encouraged. The more the crew members interacted with each other, the better. The automatic door swished open, and the Vegetamals came waddling in. Inkling turned towards the newcomers, as did everyone else. A beautiful smell wafted through the air. Inkling took a deep breath. "My, that air food smells awfully good," Quasi commented. The Vegetamals carried large trays of food, full of various dishes, both familiar and foreign. Inkling recognized some of the dishes from his visit to their island, but the other Octonauts oohed and awed over the new food. The Vegetamals had also learned a few dishes, courtesy of Shellington. There were hash browns and pancakes. There was also something that looked like long green spaghetti strips, but on closer inspection, it was actually a kelp salad. In small baskets were packets of strawberry kelp jam. This last ingredient was actually pre-ordered and stowed on the ship. Tunip, the yellow Vegetamal, came towards Inkling and Shellington. He was holding one of the trays. "Good morning," Shellington said. Tunip trilled a response and set down the tray. "What a fascinating dish," Shellington said. He squinted and leaned towards the tray, as if he wanted to take in every detail. Inkling followed his gaze, seeing the dish in question. It looked like a cake of some sort, circular and yellow. It seemed to have a soft texture. He could imagine it either very fluffy or creamy, rich, like a mousse. But the most interesting feature was that there was a face on it. 2 dots for eyes and a curved mark, as if it was smiling jovially. "Is this creature alive?" Shellington asked, poking at it with a spoon. He said that normally, but it sent a jolt through Inkling. Because of the nature of their mission, he had asked the Vegetamals and the crew to keep a vegetarian diet during their term as Octonauts. It wouldn't do any good if sea creatures and fish couldn't trust them. Tunip quickly shook his head no. Inkling immediately became at ease. "Niesa Melina, mi tapornina umardin," Tunip said. "Did you bake it then?" Shellington asked, trying to grasp what Tunip was saying. Niesa Melina, mi tapornina umardin," Tunip said again, a bit forcefully this time. There was a bit of silence, but then Shellington nodded. "Good, that's good." Tunip looked at him strangely, but the Vegetamal just shrugged and moved on to get another platter of food. The moment Tunip left the room, Shellington leaned his arms against the table. That was embarrassing. Inkling was content to not mention the awkward exchange, so he didn't expect that he had to comment on it. "It's all right, Shellington," he instinctively replied. "I really need to learn their language," he continued, glancing at the other Vegetamals coming to and from the door. "I mean, I'm already starting to have lessons with them, but it's nowhere near enough to understand sentences." "These sort of things take time," Inkling soothed, "especially since no one is around to translate the words for you. You're basically the first outsider to try to learn their language, after all." "Yeah." A small smile formed on his mouth. To be the first at something was a special place indeed. Excuse me?" Inkling heard at the other end of the table. Captain Barnacles was in his chair, his legs swiveled to one side. He was facing the large purple Vegetamal. Gruber, Inkling knew. Captain Barnacles pointed at a bowl next to his plate. Oh, wait, there were similar bowls next to all their plates. The containers held a white substance. The captain glanced at it curiously. "What is this?" Gruber looked like he was at a loss. Inkling bit his lip. He should have thought this through better. But then Gruber perked up, chattered what seemed like a command to another Vegemal, and waddled out of the room. The Octonauts followed his track with their eyes, again completely confused, especially the captain. By then, Inkling was just as embarrassed as Shellington was. He was tempted to put his face in his arms, but Inkling resisted. He had to keep his dignity, even though it was his fault that there was such a rift. But then Gruber came back, holding a couple of objects. He came right up to the captain again and held up the first object to the polar bear's face. The captain took it. "Vanilla," he murmured, looking and examining the picture on the brown bottle. Gruber held up the next object. "Kelp," Quasi chimed in. The cat grinned a bit, as if he was joining a game. "Vanilla kelp," Captain Barnacles put together. He put a spoon in the bowl, twirling it around a bit in the thick goop. "It's a very interesting combination." The captain tried to hide his discomfort, but Inkling knew better. "I believe it is some sort of pudding, Captain," Dashi added. Gruber put his flippers underneath the captain's bowl, catching the polar bear by surprise, and lifted it up. He put it toward Captain Barnacle's face, not too close, though, as if offering it to him. Gruber smiled. "Tetsuni," the Vegemal said. The intent was clear, and even if the captain originally did not want to try the dish, Inkling was certain no one could refuse that face. "All right," Captain Barnacle said, grabbing the bowl with one hand. With the other, he took the spoon, scooped a glob of the pudding, and before he could turn back, put it in his mouth. There was silence. The captain froze in place, spoon in mouth. Inkling raised his brows. Dashi and Tweak looked at each other. The captain's eyes widened. Then the polar bear was in motion again, and the spoon was put back in the bowl. But it was quickly used again. "This is incredible!" the captain exclaimed. The spoon was brought up and down again, but the captain's smile didn't leave. Everyone let out a breath. Gruber practically swelled with pride. "You really must teach me the recipe one of these days," the captain continued, digging in. "I have some relatives who love trying out new dishes. I'm sure they would love this. Is this a recipe from your native homeland?" Gruber nodded and talked, using gestures and pointing out objects as he went. The captain and the other Octonauts stood at attention, engaging in the conversation and working together to figure out the Vegemal's words. At the sight, Inkling's heart came at ease again. "We'll figure it out." Line break. Tunip held the hose with his right flipper, watering the plants in the garden pod. He always found this task a bit funny ever since they started their voyage. Here he was, watering, when there was so much water right outside their window. But that was just the nature of things. One must take the ironies of life and find the humor in them. At least, that's what the elders of his island always said. There was a swoosh of doors, and a sea otter came into the chamber. Tunip turned, the water still running, and gave a wave. "Good morning, Tunip." Shellington returned the gesture and walked up towards him. "Thank you again for teaching me Vegemalese." "No problem," Tunip trilled, making sure to smile and nod to get the point across. He turned off the hose and faced the sea otter. Shellington carried a notebook and pen in his paws, the pen already poised towards the paper. His ever-present book bag was faithfully strapped on his shoulder. Tunip was amazed at how prepared Shellington always seemed to be. He had helped so much with teaching how the foreign cooking supplies worked, and he knew so much about sea creatures and the ocean. It seemed almost impossible that he didn't know everything. It was the least Tunip could do to pay back for Shellington's kindness. And, with Shellington as a translator, he would be able to help the relations between the Octonauts and him and his brothers. Tunip was sure that Shellington was aware of this, at least deep down, so he was also grateful for that. Because while he and Gruber were able to communicate with the Octonauts relatively well, sometimes it became just too awkward. And with the other Vegemals, they tended to avoid the Octonauts and let someone else, usually Tunip, do the communicating. It became such a common thing that Inkling had asked Tunip if he would be willing to be the representative of the Vegemals during an Octo alert. That way, if there were emergency missions and the Vegemals were in the middle of cooking, they all don't have to drop what they were doing to answer the alarm. If the missions and Octo alerts became common enough, then that may mess up the eating schedule, which was something that Inkling wanted to avoid as much as possible. "Everyone's physical needs must be taken care of," he said, "and without you and your Fred's aid in that, then that could be hard to pull off. We definitely need your help in this area." And as Tunip taught Shellington words in Vegemalese, pointing at objects and saying what each thing was called, Tunip was determined to do his best. What's that in Vegemalese?" Shellington asked. He pointed at a sign. "Tracker," Tunip replied, glancing at the drawing of a carrot on it. Tunip looked down at the crops themselves. "Tracker?" Shellington repeated. Yeah, the carrots were coming along very nicely. It seemed like he had nothing to worry about, The water and irrigation and soil systems are working fine. Tracker, he repeated, giving a decisive nod. Shellington hummed, writing it down. He was already done with 1 page of notes. He put the pen to his mouth, biting the end of it. Shellington glanced off to the side, and then quickly pulled the pen back out. The sea otter looked a bit shocked, but before he could ask why, Shellington ran towards one of the crop beds. In it, there was a crop of Triatakuni. Their small, circular bodies were growing, and although a lot of them were just barely getting ready to bloom, there were some of them that needed to be picked. Shellington came to the bed and dropped to his knees, immediately taking out a magnifying glass. He put the lens up towards the Triatakuni. He lightly traced the mouth of the plant with a finger, feeling the engraving on it. "This was grown this whole time?" Shellington exclaimed. Tunip had to stop himself from laughing aloud. "Yes," Tunip couldn't help reply with the laughter bubbling in his throat. "I was trying to tell you." Shellington glanced at Tunip, and the vegetable must not have hidden his mirth well enough, because Shellington burst out laughing. Tunip couldn't hold it in, and laughed along with him. Tunip didn't know, but Shellington thought the vegetable's laughter were like bells. Their laughter rang out in the open space. Shellington was the first to calm down, and he looked at the Triatakuni again. "This is truly fascinating," he said in between breaths. "I wonder, why does this have a face if it's supposedly not alive? Is this truly sentient? Where did it come from?" And at this he looked at Tunip. "This is from your island, isn't it?" His abrupt gaze made Tunip jump a bit, but he nodded. Shellington looked back at the Triatakuni, the pen in his mouth again. "This definitely needs to be studied. I've never seen a plant such as this." He thought for a moment. "Say, Tunip," he turned towards the vegetable, "what is the name of this plant?" "Triatakuni," Tunip replied. "Triatakuni," Shellington muttered. "A fascinating name. I wonder if there's a translatable equivalent in English." Tunip thought hard on that. For some reason, understanding the Octonauts' native language was never hard, but saying the words, and sometimes translating it, could be very difficult. But as he thought about it, he found a close equivalent to the meaning of the Vegemalese word. Tunip brought up a flipper to say, "Wait a moment," before walking to the other side of the garden pod. Tunip, where are you going?" "I'm sure I saw some around here," Tunip muttered to himself, rummaging through the crates. "Aha!" he exclaimed, bringing up the object in question. Tunip turned back towards the scientist, and Shellington straightened up. Understanding came into his eyes. "It's just like that game Gruber was playing earlier today," the sea otter said. "Well, it wasn't a game, but yeah." "Okay, so the translation of the Vegemalese name starts, or has something to do with, kelp," Shellington said, putting a paw to his chin. Tunip nodded profusely, then brought his free flipper towards the sea otter. It took Tunip a couple tries, but he was able to communicate to Shellington to give him the notebook and pen. Taking the pen, he scribbled onto the paper. The lines were a bit wobbly, but it brought the point across. When Tunip was finished, he looked at it and nodded once before giving it back to the otter. Shellington looked at it for a few moments, and for a second Tunip frowned. Oh, how he wished there wasn't this stupid language barrier. That's interesting, Shellington murmured again. So the second word is cake. Kelp cake? Is that the name of it? Yep, Tunip exclaimed, nodding for the umpteenth time. He was glad he didn't have to find another way to communicate the word to him. That would have gotten hard. But looking at the way Shellington excitedly fist-pumped, Tunip found that he did not mind that much. Now that you mention it, this plant does taste a little bit like kelp, and with the shape and consistency of it, it's very easy to see how it would be associated with cakes. Now, though, Shellington put the pen in his mouth again, deep in thought, is the matter of which category this plant species falls under. Tunip, would you by any chance know? His clan had always called it a fruit, but Tunip wasn't sure if that would be the right scientific category. He had heard Inkling and Shellington talk about that once, something about the misleading qualities of tomatoes. But in any case, Tunip wasn't sure, and instead of explaining everything, he shook his head no. It was a lot quicker that way. All right then, Shellington quipped, picking one of the kelp cakes. Then to the labs it is. I've been itching to have some data. Tunip stared and raised an eyebrow as Shellington walked 10 steps towards the octochute. But then Shellington turned around. Sorry, I completely lost my manners. He shifted his grip on the kelp cake. Would you mind continuing the lesson in the lab? It'll be a nice break from watering the garden, Shellington bribed. Tunip couldn't help but chuckle. If there was anything he had learned about his new friend, it was the absolute passion of the scientist. Sure, he smirked, before falling in tandem with the otter's strides. A few days later, Inkling found a well-preserved kelp cake in one of the glass cabinets in his library. Upon asking Shellington about it, he explained that it would be a great decoration to the place, as well as a token of the first discovered object on the voyage. Inkling had no qualms about this, and so the kelp cake has stood there to this day. Author's note. You can see the kelp cake in the library. It's in the background in the episode The Octonauts and the Flying Fish.